Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am, still reeling from the events of the past few months. My name is Rachel. I'm 26, and everything started 6 years ago when my life turned upside down overnight. It was the night before my final college exams, and I was buried in textbooks when my parents called me into the living room. Their expressions were grim, and I felt a pit form in my stomach. "We need to talk," my father said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I sat down, confused and already on edge. Then came the accusation. I was trying to seduce Ethan, my sister Melissa's husband. My mom handed me a phone, and on the screen were messages supposedly from me to Ethan. Texts full of flirtation and innuendo. The messages were a joke, obvious fabrications. "This isn't real," I exclaimed, my voice trembling. "I would never do something like this." My parents didn't care. They bombarded me with questions, their disappointment radiating from every word. My father demanded to know how I could betray my sister like this. My mother, who had always been quick to defend Melissa, looked at me with such disdain it made my chest ache. "Ethan showed us these," my mom said sharply. "He didn't want to, but he thought we should know the truth." I pleaded with them, insisting I had nothing to do with the texts. "Check my phone," I said. "You'll see I never sent anything like that." But they refused. Melissa sat silently in the corner, her face pale. She hadn't spoken a word since the accusation started, and her silence stung almost as much as my parents' disbelief. Ethan, conveniently, wasn't present. "You're leaving this house," my dad finally said. "We can't have someone like you under this roof." I was stunned. "Dad, please. I have my finals tomorrow. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not our problem," he replied coldly. With no other options, I packed a bag and called my grandparents. They lived about an hour away and had always been kind to me, but I hated to burden them. When I arrived, my grandma opened the door and immediately pulled me into a hug. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. I collapsed into her arms, grateful for their support, but shattered by the realization that my own parents had turned their backs on me. Living with my grandparents was both a blessing and a challenge. Their house was warm and filled with memories, but it wasn't home, not in the way my parents' house had been. I spent the first few weeks in a fog, alternating between studying for my exams and replaying the betrayal in my head. My parents had disowned me based on Ethan's fabricated messages, and my sister, Melissa, hadn't uttered a word in my defense. Grandma and Grandpa were my rocks during that time. Grandpa, with his gruff but loving demeanor, made it his mission to distract me from my pain. "Focus on your exams," he'd say. "Show them that you don't need their approval to succeed." And I did. Despite everything, I aced my finals and graduated with honors. But even as I moved forward with my life, the pain of being cast out by my own family lingered. 2 years passed. I landed a decent job, began saving for my own place, and strengthened my relationship with my boyfriend, Lucas. Meanwhile, my grandparents' health began to decline. Grandpa was diagnosed with a heart condition, and though he tried to downplay it, we all knew his time was limited. When he passed away, it was devastating. He had been my protector, my biggest supporter, and losing him felt like losing a piece of myself. What hurt even more was my parents' response. They didn't attend the funeral. While Grandma and I struggled to cope with our loss, my cousin sent me screenshots of their vacation posts on social media, smiling photos on a sunny beach. It was a slap in the face, a clear message that they no longer considered us part of their family. Weeks after the funeral, my father showed up unannounced at Grandma's house. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking somber but strangely detached. "I thought it was time we talked," he said. I didn't trust his sudden appearance, but Grandma, ever the optimist, invited him in. He sat at the kitchen table, glancing around as if he were sizing up the place. "I wanted to see how you and Mom were holding up," he said, his tone almost rehearsed. It didn't take long for his true intentions to surface. As we talked, he casually brought up Grandpa's savings and assets. "I assume everything's still in order," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. Grandma's face hardened. "Your father made his wishes clear," she said. That's when it hit me. He wasn't there to make amends. He was there for the inheritance. What my father didn't know was that Grandpa had anticipated this. Before his death, Grandpa had updated his will, leaving everything to Grandma and me. My father had been cut out entirely, a decision Grandpa had made after witnessing his son's abandonment firsthand. When Grandma calmly informed him of this, his demeanor shifted. His voice grew sharp, accusing me of manipulating Grandpa in his final years. "You always had a way of turning people against me," he spat. I stood my ground, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. Grandpa made his own decisions. He saw who was there for him and who wasn't. The confrontation was draining, but I refused to back down. Eventually, my father stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As I watched him leave, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It was clear that my family would never be the same, but at least Grandpa's legacy and Grandma's security was safe from his greed. The years that followed my father's outburst were both challenging and transformative. I graduated college, built a stable career, and supported my grandmother as best I could. Lucas, my boyfriend, stood by my side through it all, becoming my anchor as I navigated the aftermath of being cut off from my family. My parents? They stayed away for the most part, except for the occasional guilt-laden text or voicemail. "We just want what's best for you," my mom would say, conveniently forgetting the part where they'd thrown me out and chosen Ethan's lies over their own daughter. I thought I'd come to terms with the fractured state of my family, accepting that some wounds would never heal. But then, out of the blue, Melissa showed up at my door. It was late on a rainy Tuesday evening, and I had just settled down with Lucas for dinner when there was a frantic knock at the door. When I opened it, Melissa was standing there, soaked to the bone and visibly distraught. "Rachel," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know where else to go. I let her in, offering her a towel and a seat. It was surreal to see her like this. Melissa, the golden child who always seemed so composed and untouchable, was now a sobbing mess in my living room. Through broken sentences and gasps for air, she told me what had happened. She'd come home early from work to surprise Ethan and found him with another woman. When she confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. But what came next was the real bombshell. In his desperation to justify his actions, Ethan admitted to something that left me reeling. For years, he had been saving his mistress's number under my name to cover his tracks. Melissa's voice broke as she recounted Ethan's confession. "He said it was foolproof," she sobbed, "that no one would suspect anything because you were already the troublemaker." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what she was saying. All the accusations, the fabricated messages, the destruction of my relationship with my parents, it all made sense now. Ethan had framed me to protect himself, and everyone had fallen for it. "I believed him," Melissa whispered, her voice filled with guilt. "I let him convince me that you were the problem. I defended him, Rachel. I turned my back on you because I thought he was telling the truth." Her words cut deep. For so long, I had carried the weight of their accusations, questioning what I could have done differently to make them believe me. Now, the truth was out, and it was both a vindication and a fresh wound. "I don't know how to make this right," Melissa said, her eyes pleading with me. "But I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her for not trusting me in the first place. Another part wanted to comfort her because, despite everything, she was my sister, and she was clearly shattered. Instead, I simply said, "We'll figure it out." And for the first time in years, I meant it. Melissa moved in with Grandma, and meanwhile she tried to piece her life back together. She didn't want to face Ethan or the house that had become a reminder of his lies and betrayal. Watching her unpack years of deception was both heartbreaking and eye-opening. For the first time, Melissa wasn't the polished, confident older sister I had grown up with. She was raw, vulnerable, and utterly broken. It wasn't just the affair, she confessed one night over tea. It was everything. The way he manipulated me into doubting myself. Doubting you. I don't even know who I am anymore. Hearing her talk like that was surreal. This was the same woman who had stood silently by as our parents threw me out, who had married the man who orchestrated my downfall. But now, as she sat across from me, I could see just how deeply Ethan had controlled her life. Ethan, predictably, didn't make things easy. When Melissa confronted him about the affair, he downplayed it, calling it a stupid mistake and accusing her of blowing things out of proportion. "I never meant for it to go this far," he told her over the phone, his voice dripping with insincerity. "Can't we just move past this?" But Melissa wasn't the same person who had blindly trusted him for years. She didn't buy into his excuses, and she didn't waver when he tried to guilt her into staying. When she told him she wanted a divorce, he lashed out, calling her ungrateful and accusing her of ruining their marriage. "You're just like Rachel," he spat during one heated exchange. Always playing the victim. Melissa relayed the conversation to me later, her hands shaking with anger. "He's still trying to pit us against each other," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm done falling for his lies." As the divorce process began, Melissa became a different person. She was no longer the passive, complacent wife who had let Ethan dictate her reality. Instead, she was determined to take back control of her life. During those weeks, she apologized to me countless times. "I don't know how to make it up to you," she said one evening. "I let him convince me that you were the problem. I should have believed you." Her regret was palpable, and though it couldn't undo the damage, it was a start. I didn't sugarcoat things. "Melissa, it hurt more than I can put into words," I told her honestly. "But you're here now, and that means something. Let's focus on moving forward." For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that our relationship could be salvaged. Together, we began to navigate the mess Ethan had left behind, one step at a time. Helping Melissa through the divorce process was an emotional whirlwind. She leaned on me in ways I never thought she would, and for the first time, we began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered years ago. Ethan, of course, wasn't about to go quietly. He called Melissa incessantly, alternating between apologies and veiled threats. He showed up at Grandma's house uninvited one rainy evening, pounding on the door until Melissa finally agreed to talk to him outside. I watched from the window, ready to intervene, but Melissa held her ground. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore," she told him, her voice steady despite the pain etched on her face. "You lied, you cheated, and you tried to destroy my family. There's no coming back from that." Ethan's response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "I made one mistake," he argued, his tone shifting from pleading to defensive. "You're throwing away everything we built over nothing." Melissa didn't flinch. "You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed my trust, my relationships, and my self-worth. And then you framed my sister to cover your tracks. That's not nothing." The conversation ended with Ethan storming off, muttering under his breath about how Melissa was being dramatic. Watching her stand up to him was bittersweet. I hated that she had to go through this, but I was proud of the strength she was beginning to find. As the weeks turned into months, Melissa began to focus on rebuilding her life. She started therapy, updated her resume, and began looking for a new place to live. She even started cooking again, a hobby she'd abandoned during her marriage because Ethan had made her feel like it was pointless. One night, as we cleaned up after dinner, she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry for everything, Rachel. For not believing you, for not standing up for you, for letting him come between us." I paused, the weight of her words sinking in. "You hurt me," I admitted. "But seeing you take back your life, it means a lot. I think we can move past this." It wasn't an overnight fix, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my sister back. Together, we were picking up the pieces of our fractured lives, and in doing so, we were finding a way forward. When our parents learned about Melissa's divorce, the fallout was as dramatic as I had anticipated, but far more hurtful. Instead of rallying around her during one of the most challenging times of her life, they immediately took Ethan's side. "I don't understand," my mother said during the tense family meeting Melissa reluctantly agreed to attend. "What could possibly be so bad that you'd throw away your marriage? Do you want to embarrass this family? Do you want people to talk?" Melissa, sitting stiffly in her chair, responded calmly. "Ethan cheated on me, Mom. He lied to me for years, and he used Rachel to cover it up. That's why this marriage is over." But my father, ever the enforcer of family values, dismissed her reasoning. "No marriage is perfect, Melissa. People make mistakes. That doesn't mean you quit. You work through it. That's what adults do." His words made my blood boil. "Adults also take accountability for their actions," I interjected, my voice sharp. "Ethan hasn't apologized. He hasn't tried to make amends. He's just trying to gaslight Melissa into staying." My mother's glare turned to me. "This isn't your business, Rachel. You've caused enough damage as it is." I was used to being the scapegoat, but Melissa wasn't having it. "No, Mom," she said firmly. "Rachel isn't the problem. She never was. Ethan is the one who lied and manipulated all of us, and you believed him without question. You turned on Rachel because of his lies. How can you defend him now?" My mother sighed, exasperated. "It's not about defending him. It's about the bigger picture. Do you want people to know you're divorced? Do you want them to think there's something wrong with our family? There is something wrong with our family." Melissa's voice cracked as she stood up. "You care more about what people think than about your own daughters. Ethan betrayed me, and instead of supporting me, you're trying to guilt me into staying with him. Don't you see how wrong that is?" For a brief moment, I thought her words might break through their defenses. But my father crossed his arms, his expression cold. "Marriage is about compromise, Melissa. Nobody's perfect. You don't just walk away because things get hard." Melissa let out a bitter laugh. "Hard? You think this is just a rough patch? He had an affair. He destroyed my trust, manipulated me, and made me turn against my own sister. And now, you're doing the same thing by defending him. My father shook his head, dismissing her anger. You've changed, Melissa. Ever since you started spending time with Rachel again, you've been different. She's filling your head with negativity. I felt my face flush with frustration. This isn't about me. This is about the fact that you're enabling Ethan's behavior because it's easier than admitting you were wrong. Watch your tone, young lady, my mother snapped. We are still your parents, and we've done everything for this family. No, you've done everything for appearances, Melissa shot back. You threw Rachel under the bus to protect your image, and now you're trying to do the same to me. But I'm done. I'm done letting you manipulate me into putting your reputation above my happiness. Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, I saw my sister stand up to them with the kind of strength I had always wished for. But our parents weren't ready to let go of their narrative. You're making a mistake, my mother said coldly. If you walk away from this marriage, you'll regret it. And don't expect us to clean up the mess. Melissa's voice softened, but it didn't waver. The only mistake I made was trusting Ethan and trusting you to have my back. I'm not asking for your help. I'm asking for respect. But I see now that's too much to ask. She turned to leave, and I followed without hesitation. As we walked out of the house, Melissa's shoulders sagged, the weight of years of misplaced trust finally crashing down on her. They'll never change, will they? She asked quietly as we got into the car. No, I said gently. But you don't need their approval anymore. You've got me, and you've got Grandma. That's enough. It wasn't the resolution either of us had hoped for, but it was a step towards something better. For the first time in years, Melissa and I were standing together, ready to build a future free from the toxicity that had defined our family for so long. That night, we sat in the living room with Grandma, sipping tea and reflecting on the confrontation. I'm proud of you, Grandma said to Melissa. You stood up for yourself. That's not easy. Melissa nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I just wish it didn't have to be this way. I wish they could see how much they've hurt us. They might never see it, I said. But that doesn't mean you're wrong for standing up to them. You deserve better, Melissa. We both do. As the night wore on, the anger and sadness began to give way to a sense of relief. We weren't just breaking away from Ethan or our parents' expectations. We were breaking free from the patterns that had held us back for so long. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were finally moving forward. It had been months since Melissa confronted Ethan, exposed his lies, and began to piece her life back together. The storm had settled somewhat, though the emotional scars remained raw. We were finally starting to find a new normal, one that no longer revolved around my parents' approval or Ethan's deceit. Then, out of the blue, my father called. When I saw his name flash across my phone screen, I almost didn't answer. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I had the energy to deal with more family drama. But curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up. Rachel, he began, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, Melissa, and Ethan. He paused, as though gathering his thoughts. I didn't know what to believe back then. I see now that I was wrong. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Was this an apology? I'm sorry for doubting you, he continued. I should have listened, should have trusted you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I regret what happened. His words were halting, awkward, like someone forcing themselves to read lines from a script. But they still stirred something in me, even if they didn't feel entirely sincere. Dad, I said, my voice wavering. Do you understand how much you hurt me? How much you hurt Melissa? You didn't just doubt me. You believed the worst about me, and it ruined our relationship for years. I know, he replied softly, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I wanted to believe him, but years of betrayal and broken trust made it hard. This isn't just about forgiving you, I said. It's about you proving that things can actually change. I need to see that you mean this, Dad. A few days later, my mother called. Her tone was different, more defensive than regretful. We were just trying to protect Melissa, she said, as though that excused everything. You have to understand, Rachel, it was a confusing time for all of us. Confusing? I repeated, my frustration bubbling to the surface. It wasn't confusing for me. I knew I was innocent. You're the ones who chose to believe Ethan without a second thought. She sighed. I don't want to argue about the past. I just want us to move forward. Can't we do that? It was typical of her to gloss over the pain she'd caused, framing reconciliation as a simple matter of letting bygones be bygones. I don't know, Mom, I said honestly. You say you want to move forward, but I haven't heard you take any real accountability. You didn't just let Ethan manipulate Melissa. You let him tear our family apart. That's not something I can just forget. In the weeks that followed, my parents' attempts at reconciliation continued in fits and starts. My father made an effort to rebuild our relationship, though his awkwardness often made it difficult to tell whether he was being genuine or just trying to ease his guilt. My mother, on the other hand, seemed more focused on regaining control. She started calling regularly, asking pointed questions about my life, and offering unsolicited advice, as if trying to slip back into her role as the authority figure she had long since forfeited. Melissa, meanwhile, wanted nothing to do with them. She was still furious at their initial refusal to support her decision to divorce Ethan, and their half-hearted apologies did little to soothe her anger. "I don't care what they say," she told me one evening as we sat on the couch, watching an old movie. "They chose him over us, over you. They let him destroy our family. And now they want to pretend it never happened? No, thank you." I didn't blame her for feeling that way. In many ways, I felt the same, but a part of me, perhaps the part that still longed for the family we used to be, wanted to believe that things could get better. A tentative truce began to form, though it was fragile at best. My parents started inviting us to family dinners, but Melissa declined every time to navigate those tense gatherings alone. At one such dinner, my father tried to bring up Ethan. "I still don't understand how he could do something like that," he said, shaking his head. "We trusted him." "So did I replied quietly. "And I paid the price for it." The conversation ended there, but the weight of unspoken truths lingered in the air. Rebuilding our relationship was proving to be a slow and complicated process, fraught with unresolved tensions and lingering resentments. But for the first time in years, it felt like there was at least a chance for healing, if we were willing to put in the work. Whether or not that chance would be enough remained to be seen. Melissa and I were finally finding our rhythm as sisters, something we hadn't truly had since we were children. The days of tension, accusations, and distance felt like a distant memory as we tackled this new chapter together. Watching her reclaim her independence after years of being manipulated by Ethan was nothing short of inspiring. She threw herself into her new job, working long hours but finding satisfaction in building something entirely her own. I often helped her sort through job listings and rehearse for interviews. And when she finally landed a position at a marketing firm, we celebrated with takeout and wine on her apartment floor because she hadn't yet bought furniture. "You have no idea how good it feels to wake up and not feel trapped," she told me one night as we shared a bottle of cheap Chardonnay. "For years, I thought I had to settle for what I had, even if it made me miserable. But now, I can breathe again." As Melissa moved forward, our parents seemed to inch their way back into our lives. My father, in particular, was making an effort that, while unexpected, was also deeply needed. He started stopping by Grandma's house regularly, helping with errands and chores she could no longer manage on her own. "I don't know if he's doing this for me, or because he feels guilty," Grandma admitted one afternoon as we folded laundry together. "But either way, it's nice to have the help. And maybe it's a step in the right direction." For the first time in years, my father's actions felt genuine. He didn't ask for anything in return, no money, no favors, no acknowledgement. It was just him, trying in his awkward way to make up for all the harm he'd caused. My mother, however, was a different story. She remained distant, as though unsure how to approach the situation without losing the upper hand she'd clung to for so long. When she did reach out, her attempts at reconciliation often felt more like obligations than heartfelt gestures. Despite my lingering reservations, I decided to accept my father's attempts to rebuild our relationship. When he invited me to lunch one Saturday, I cautiously agreed. The restaurant he chose was one we'd frequented as a family when I was younger, and the familiarity brought a pang of nostalgia. As we sat across from each other, the conversation was slow at first, but eventually he opened up. "I know I've made a mess of things," he said, his eyes downcast. "I can't undo the past, Rachel. I wish I could, but I can't. All I can do is try to do better moving forward." "Why now?" I asked, my voice softer than I expected. He hesitated, then said, "Because I've realized how much I've lost. You, Melissa, even your grandmother. I pushed you all away. And for what? To defend a lie? To keep up appearances? It wasn't worth it." His honesty caught me off guard. For the first time in years, it felt like we were having a real conversation, one not clouded by anger or defensiveness. Meanwhile, Melissa was slowly warming up to the idea of reconnecting with our parents, though she remained guarded. She agreed to attend a family dinner at Grandma's house, her first in years. When she walked through the door, I could see the tension in her shoulders. My father greeted her with a hesitant smile, and my mother, true to form, fussed over how much weight she'd lost since the last time they saw her. The evening was awkward but civil. Over roast chicken and mashed potatoes, we made small talk about work, Grandma's health, and the weather. It wasn't the emotional breakthrough I'd hoped for, but it was a start. As we cleaned up after dinner, my father pulled Melissa aside. Though I couldn't hear their conversation, I saw the way her face softened as he spoke. Later, she told me he'd apologized, truly apologized, for not supporting her during her marriage to Ethan. I don't know if I can forgive him yet, she admitted. But it's nice to know he's at least trying. The progress we were making as a family was slow and fragile, but it was there. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. Melissa's divorce was finalized a few months later, and though it was bittersweet, it marked the beginning of her new life. She threw a small party to celebrate, inviting only a few close friends and family. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to celebrate a divorce, she joked as we raised our glasses. But honestly, this feels like freedom. I couldn't have been prouder of her. Our parents didn't attend the party, but my father sent a message the next day. I hope you know how proud I am of you. He wrote to Melissa. You've shown so much strength. When she showed me the text, her eyes glistened with tears. Maybe he's finally learning, she said quietly. Though we still had a long way to go, I felt hopeful for the first time in years. The fractures in our family would never fully heal, but at least we were starting to bridge the gaps. Melissa was thriving, Grandma was as spirited as ever, and even my father was showing signs of change. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. The news of Ethan's downfall came through a mutual acquaintance, and it spread like wildfire. He had been fired from his high-profile job after an internal audit revealed that he had been embezzling funds. Thousands of dollars siphoned off to finance his extravagant affair. When Melissa called to tell me, I could hear the mixture of shock and satisfaction in her voice. Can you believe it? She said, barely able to contain her laughter. The mighty Ethan, brought down by his own arrogance. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. For years, Ethan had manipulated and lied his way through life, tearing my family apart in the process. Now his actions had finally caught up to him. The fallout from Ethan's scandal was swift and brutal. His company didn't just fire him. They pursued legal action, accusing him of fraud and breach of trust. The man who had once been celebrated as the perfect husband and a rising star in his career was now the subject of public disgrace. Melissa and I couldn't resist a bit of schadenfreude as we read the news articles online. Ethan Sanders fired amid embezzlement scandal, one headline declared. Another labeled him the fall of a family man. Melissa shook her head, smirking as she scrolled through the comment section. Looks like the whole world is finally seeing him for who he really is. What struck me most wasn't just the professional consequences Ethan faced, but how his personal life imploded alongside it. His mistress, the one he had risked everything for, left him as soon as the money dried up. His so-called friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with a disgraced con artist. My parents, who had once defended Ethan so fiercely, were conspicuously silent. I could only imagine their embarrassment at realizing they had championed a man who had not only betrayed their daughter, but also broken the law. Grandma, ever the sharp-tongued matriarch, summed it up perfectly. He always thought he was smarter than everyone else, she said, shaking her head. Well, he outsmarted himself. For Melissa, this was more than just a moment of poetic justice. It was a turning point. She had spent so much of her life doubting her worth, believing Ethan's lies, and trying to fit into the mold he and our parents had created for her. Now, she was free of all of it. He doesn't control me anymore, she said one evening as we sipped tea in her cozy new apartment. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm finally living my own life. I saw the strength in her eyes, the confidence that had been missing for so long. Melissa was no longer the woman who had doubted her instincts, stood by Ethan despite his faults, or blindly followed our parents' wishes. She was her own person now, and it was beautiful to see. As for me, Ethan's downfall brought a sense of closure I didn't realize I needed. It wasn't just about justice. It was about finally being able to let go of the anger and resentment I had carried for so long. The man who had framed me, lied to my family, and turned my life upside down had lost everything. And while I didn't revel in his misery, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that karma had finally caught up to him. Do you regret anything? Melissa asked me one evening, her voice thoughtful. I considered her question carefully. I regret how much power we let him have over us, I said. But I don't regret standing up for myself. And I don't regret the bond we've rebuilt because of it. Melissa smiled, nodding. Neither do I. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. The wounds Ethan had inflicted on our family were deep, but they had also brought us closer together. My parents, though still struggling to fully accept their mistakes, had softened considerably. My father continued to visit Grandma, offering his help wherever he could. My mother, while still distant at times, made an effort to reconnect with Melissa and me. And Melissa? She was thriving. Her new job was going well. She had started dating again, and she seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. Watching her laugh and joke, free from the shadow of her past, was the greatest revenge of all. Ethan's downfall might have been poetic justice, but Melissa's rise was the real victory. As for Ethan, the last I heard, he was living in a small apartment, drowning in legal troubles and struggling to rebuild his life. He had become a cautionary tale, a man undone by his own hubris. I didn't think about him often anymore. He was a chapter of my life that I had finally closed. Because in the end, it wasn't about him. It was about us, Melissa, Grandma, and me, choosing to move forward stronger and more united than ever before. It's been years since the chaos that Ethan unleashed on our family. But today, my life feels like it belongs to someone else, a version of me that found peace, even after the storm. Lucas and I are engaged, and planning our wedding has been a joyful escape from the struggles of the past. He's my rock, my constant, and the person who stood by me when it felt like the world had turned its back on me. Seeing him bond with Grandma has only deepened my love for him. They often joke about who can make the best pancakes, and let's just say their friendly rivalry has brought a lot of laughter back into our home. Melissa is flourishing in ways I never thought possible. She's taken control of her life, built a new career, and even started traveling, a dream she'd buried during her years with Ethan. We recently took a weekend trip to the mountains, just the two of us, and it felt like reclaiming lost time. Our parents, however, remain a complicated part of the equation. My father continues to make an effort, frequently visiting Grandma and showing genuine remorse. My mother, while less open about her feelings, has softened in her own way. She sends messages more often now, small updates about her day or casual check-ins to ask how we're doing. It's not perfect, and I've stopped expecting it to be. One evening, over dinner with Lucas, I told him about a recent call from my mom. She asked if we'd visit for the holidays. I said, unsure how I felt about it. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his gaze steady. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I want to forgive, but I don't know if I'm ready to forget." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Then don't rush it. You can set the boundaries you need. They'll have to meet you where you are." It was a simple truth, but it resonated deeply. I've spent so much of my life trying to meet my parents' expectations, but now I know that I can't sacrifice my peace to make others comfortable. Ethan, on the other hand, is a name I barely think about anymore. The last update I heard was that he'd relocated to another city, trying to rebuild his life after his career imploded. Melissa occasionally gets updates through mutual friends, but she's indifferent. "It's like hearing about someone you knew in another lifetime," she told me recently. "I don't hate him anymore. I just don't care." Her words stuck with me. They encapsulated everything I'd worked toward. Not forgiveness in the traditional sense, but letting go of the hold the past had on me. Ethan may have been a central figure in the unraveling of our family, but he no longer holds power over our present. Today, my life is full in ways I never imagined during those dark days. I wake up each morning grateful for the family I've chosen: Lucas, Melissa, and Grandma. They're my anchors, the people who've shown me that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Grandma often says that scars are just proof of survival. Looking at my life now, I know she's right. The wounds Ethan inflicted, the betrayal of my parents, and the years of rebuilding have all shaped me into someone stronger, more resilient, and more open to the possibilities of happiness. Melissa and I talk about the future a lot, traveling more, her maybe moving closer to Lucas and me, and the life we're building together as siblings who've overcome so much. And when I look at the journey we've taken, I feel proud. Not just of Melissa, but of myself for never giving up, even when it seemed like there was no way forward. Sometimes, life doesn't give you the family you deserve, but it gives you the tools to build one that's even stronger. And for that, I'm endlessly grateful.